of you all here want to start a company one day if you haven't started it already? How many of you all hope you may or dream it would be great if you do this? Ever thought of it that if you want to start your company, what would be the ideal way to start? What if you follow your passion and convert it into a business? Would you really enjoy yourself then? Convert your passion into your business. Here is one person as a sound engineer. Matt started off 20 years ago. And 5 years ago, is it?
6 years ago.
6 years ago, he found an opportunity to ensure that he can actually start Splice because the music was his passion. He saw an opportunity, grabbed it. 6 years later, he's a keynote speaker at GopherCon. Right? So if you want to, yeah, please clap loudly for Matt.
Thank you.
And we'll hear a lot more about him in his talk. So Matt, looking forward. Over to you.
Thank you. So this is where I live, the entertainment capital of the world. This is the city of spotlights, the city of stars and fallen angels, Los Angeles, where everybody seems to have a dream, and we all come here because we want to make it happen. I remember the first time I moved to Los Angeles, I went to an event, and I think it was a show, and I get to the show and I wait in line, and this guy behind me starts talking to me and is like introducing himself, telling me about himself, and I don't remember what he was talking about, but I was, kind of paying attention, and he ends this long discussion with, Matt, what's your story? And it's funny because at that moment, I started panicking a little bit. Like, I don't have a story. Like, I didn't know I had to bring a story to this party. What do you mean, what's your story? And I really thought about it, and I was a bit embarrassed that I didn't have a story. I didn't know what to answer. So I thought about it, and I went back home. I think at this time, I answered the question by talking about how I got there, and I was excited about the tacos we're going to eat, and the show sounded really exciting. And that person was very not happy with my answer. So I went back home, and I thought about it. And I remember a conversation I had with a friend of mine who's a director. And we went to watch a movie, and he was telling me how the movie was not really good. And it's like, it's not hard to make a movie. There is something that was written in 1949 that explains everything you need to know about telling a story. And this is called the Hero's Journey Chart. And he's explaining that every single story that we're telling now, from movies to books, follow patterns that can be recognized. And you have the hero, and she or he might go into an adventure and go through challenges. There's death often that happens, and atonements, and then they come back and they learn new things. And this is kind of a normal journey. And I was thinking about it, I'm like, oh, that's an interesting thing. I could use that, and I'm going to try to tell my story. So my name is Matt. I'm the CTO and co-founder of a music company called Splice. And we assist music producers into their creative journey. I started Splice 6 years ago, and I did it so I could really help my friends who are music producers. Music producers are some of the people that get the most lied to on a daily basis. From their friends, their families, their agents, everybody's making money off of them, and they have a really hard time making it, even though they have so much emotions and things they want to share. My goal was to bring technology and to really help them express themselves better. So we built a platform. We have now millions of music producers. About 40%, 50% of the top 40 is being made on Splice. It's really exciting to be able to support those people. We offer various services from version control for music, kind of like GitHub, but for music producers. And we also have a very rich marketplace that allows sound designers and musicians to provide content for the musicians to work on things. So for instance, do you guys know Despacito, the song? Have you heard? It's a pretty popular song. So the two people who wrote the song, Andres and Mauricio, extracted a lot of their sounds and put them on the platform so other people can take this music and create other songs. And today, most of the music we have is made of different sounds coming together and being recreated. So we put this service in place, and we distribute the money that we make to the artists. And I'm really glad to say that last year we announced that we paid more than $10 million to those different artists on the platform. But in my life, I did a lot of different things before I got to that. I did a lot of different jobs, from cleaning up graveyards to writing code for shortwave transmitter automation systems and spending time in studios. I worked in video games. I did the startup life. I did a lot of different things. But when I grew up, I was very different than other kids. I was very, very driven. I wanted to do a lot of things. But the challenge being a kid that is very driven is sometimes the culture around you is not very supportive of that. And, you hear things like, well, you'll get to that once you have 5 diplomas and maybe your PhD, and then you can look into this really hard problem. Or maybe when you have 10-year experience and you reach level 52 of engineering, then you can do that. And I really didn't like that. The thing that I had, though, is I was very lucky to be at a time when we were switching from analog to digital. So that was a time where everything in music was going from being physically on a hardware device to being on a computer. So I was the young kid who knew how to use a computer. I could use a mouse, and those older engineers who had 40 years of experience wanted to learn the computers, and I wanted to learn from them. So we had this really good exchange where I could learn from them. I could be trained to hear the sound the way they were hearing it, to process the signal the way they're processing it, and in exchange, I would teach them how to use a mouse. Which, by the way, is funny because I have an 8-year-old and a 4-year-old kid, and I was telling them about this story the other day, and they're like, what's a mouse? Why did you use a mouse for a computer? I'm like, wait, you don't know what a mouse is? So they were like, is that like, why do you do it? So I realized we didn't have a mouse at home, so I ordered one on Amazon, and then I showed it to them, and they only knew trackpads and iPad screens, which is kind of crazy. When you think about it, I taught this old generation how to use a mouse, and then my kids didn't even know what a mouse was. So that's a different story. But the point was that I was really able to learn from them, and in exchange, I would teach them how to use a computer. And what was fascinating for me at that time was that we went from a generation that could hear sound to my generation who could see sound, because the computer was really representing the sound, and I was spending more time looking at it than hearing it. And they really brought a lot of this knowledge to me, but they also gave me this passion for this physical hardware, those devices that would cost $10,000 US dollars, and I could not afford any of this software, or any of this hardware. But what happened is, at the time, they started taking those devices and make them into software. The challenge is the hardware device was $10,000. So they thought, you know what, we're going to sell software. It's also going to be $10,000, so we don't lose money if you switch to that. And obviously, I could not afford that kind of software. So I got into reverse engineering. And that was my first time really getting deep into computer. And I realized, oh, you can remove those protections. So this $10,000 of software, I can actually get it for free to just learn it, not to use it, just to learn it. But I got to dig into the software, remove protection, and I found a great community of people online that really helped me learn this approach of programming and understanding computers at a very low level. Now, the challenge with that is that after a while, I got a bit frustrated because I wanted to do more than just modify software. I wanted to create software. So I learned computer science, I learned programming, I went through a few languages until I got to a point where I met a community of people around a language called Ruby. And what was very interesting about Ruby is that people have a lot of strong values. They cared a lot about testing, they cared about moving things quickly, about expressing yourself. And I found a community of people that were driven like me to get to something. So I joined that community. I did a lot within this community, and you know the story. Rails blew up, Web 2.0. All of a sudden, that was a big thing. And at that time, I was also interested in looking into other aspects of programming languages. And Apple was working on a project where they wanted Ruby to potentially be the new language for desktop and for mobile. And that was very interesting to me because I got to work on implementing the language on top of a different runtime, and that was really stretching my knowledge. And the project didn't really go as expected, and instead there was another project at the same time for the same mission at Apple called Swift, and that's the one that won. And today you can write applications on iOS and on desktop using Swift. But it was a really great experience. And it was around the same time that Google released this new programming language called Go. I'm sure you all heard of it, otherwise you'd not be here. And I was very fascinated by this language. Coming from, Java and C# and Perl, I did Visual Basic, I was doing PHP. I think I did all languages at the time that everybody was using. But I spent a lot of time in Ruby. Go came very interestingly closer to a C language, but without a lot of the challenges. And I love the fact that it was such a simple language. I could really grasp it, and I could feel that I was in control, and I was spending less time fighting the language and more time building the code I wanted to write. And that was something that was very interesting, especially because I was addressing different challenges. In Ruby was really going towards the web and Rails and all those different things. And with Go, I was writing more system stuff, image processing, a lot of different things that I would not get to do in Ruby. So it was very interesting. And fast forward a few years later, so 6 years ago, I started my company, and I decided that Go is going to be the main language. And I went through an entire process, and we can talk more about it, about how I picked it. But six years later, I'm very happy I made that choice. We have millions of artists relying on our system, and Go is at the heart of everything we do, both on the desktop and also on the web. I'm also very excited to see that Go never betrayed us. The promise of Go at the beginning was that they would stay compatible and things would not break. And when you move quickly and you grow the company from 2 or 3 people to 170 people like we are right now, you need to have something that's stable and you can grow a team around. And even seeing now the team look at Go 2.0 and the approach they're taking, working with the community and making sure that the transition is going to be smooth, is very important when we went through some very challenging times with Python, Ruby, and Java, when we have those big shifts coming up. So what do I do? Well, today I spend most of my time working and supporting artists. Those are some really big hip-hop and R&B producers or friends of mine, thinking, exploring, and coding solutions that could help them and help other musicians around the world express themselves and also make a living off of their music, because it's really hard as a musician to make a living. So I use those reverse engineering skills, my experiences with diverse languages, and my hope is to change things and learn through the process. But is that really my story? And as I was preparing this talk, I was like, you know what? This is not a story. This is just like a list of things I did. This is not what I want to leave you with. This is just, I want to talk to you about what allowed me to accomplish that. What I want to talk about is, I want to be able to create this chart of patterns that allow me to move forward in my life, in my technical life. And I was lucky to find those opportunities, and I hope you will also be lucky to find those opportunities. But I want to talk about what allowed me to be there, and I want to share that with you. It might not be a good match always for you, but I want to talk about what helps me in my journey. And I think you can find your own journey, and you can build it wherever you are, wherever you are. So there are 3 themes I want to talk to you about. One is always be learning. From early on, when I wanted to be a sound engineer, to even now, I think learning is something we should all be doing. Now, the challenge is that Go might be a bit boring at times. Actually, Go is super boring, and that's why I love it. I think this is something that people who don't know Go might be surprised at first to hear, but I don't have to fight to understand the language. It's boring. You can learn it in a couple of weeks. I was talking to someone this morning saying, you bring an engineer, if they have the knowledge, programming knowledge, in a couple of weeks, they're great, they can do it. Now, the problem is if you always want to learn, you might want to go a bit deeper, and you might want to look into some more obscure aspect of things like the SSA backend compiler or the race detector and see how it's implemented. But I want to tell you my journey looking at something a bit new in Go that's a bit more on the fringe, on the edge, and that's WebAssembly. Did anyone hear about that? Do you know that it's now supported in Go 1.11? So when I saw this announcement, I'm like, oh, I heard about that. I read some articles, but I always want to be learning, so I'm going to go through this process and I'm going to learn it. And I'm just going to replay that for you so you understand what I'm going through. So I have this framework where I always ask those questions when I look at new technology. What is it? What can I do with it? How do I use it with the programming language I want to use? And at the end, is it really useful to me? How much should I invest in it? So this is my experience. I'm not saying that I'm right. I just want to walk you through my process. So bear with me. First thing, what is it? What is WebAssembly? So you go onto the website and you see this very interesting explanation saying WebAssembly is a binary instruction format for stack-based virtual machine. WebAssembly is designed as a portable target for compilation of high-level language like C, C++, Rust, and Go, enabling deployment on the web for client and server applications. So that's a lot of big words that might or might not be relevant to me right now since I want to know what it is. But what I understand is that it's a binary instruction format. So what that means is that it's the output. It's not a programming language. It's an output. It's a format that would run in a virtual machine. And the goal is really to take what you would write in Go, maybe server-side, and be able to run it inside the browser. So if we talk about browsers, let's take a look at the support across all browsers. So the good news is that all browsers that are relevant to me, at least, are well supported and have been supported for long enough that it should be working very well. Now, I did notice that Chrome actually has a feature flag that allows us to be faster. That's just a side note for anyone who's interested. They've been supporting WebAssembly for a while, but they have now a new engine called Liftoff that allows WebAssembly to load faster. But the good news is that I could write something, it would work on an iOS device, it would work on an Android device, it would work on a computer, and even people using Edge would be happy to use it. So how does it work? Well, you write your source code, so that would be in Go here, then you compile it, you get the bytecode, and off of the bytecode, you provide that to JavaScript. So JavaScript will load this bytecode and provide that to the VM. If you use Chrome, for instance, that would be V8. And now this binary code, this bytecode, is available to the VM and can interact with the DOM, and the DOM can interact with the code you wrote. So that's very interesting. Let's see what you can do with it. Well, obviously, I can write whatever code I write server-side on the client. So I can move my computation to be on the edge, on a mobile device, or in a browser on the desktop, which is interesting. I guess I could do image and audio and video processing without having to push any data to the server. I don't have a clear use case at that point, but I found this really cool stuff. This is a Game Boy Color. So this guy wrote an entire Game Boy emulator in Go that loads ROM and displays onto the browser. And it's all Go and WebAssembly. And I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. Now, I don't need to do that, but that's pretty cool. So let's see how you do it with Go. So first step, find the README. And it says, this is your hello world. Now, I've been writing Go for many years. That's pretty easy. I get this in my code. I compile it, move it into the browser. And it's not super exciting. I'm kind of confused when I run it. It doesn't look like it works. Turns out you have to open the console at the bottom of Chrome, and it just says, hello WebAssembly. And I'm like, well, that's not the most exciting hello world I've seen. Let's see what I can do. I guess I need to, I thought I would be able to add an image and maybe process it. I had this idea. The first Go code I wrote in 2009 or 10 was this CSI enhancer, where I wanted to put a photo that was all blurry, and it would be like zoom, 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 like in CSI. And I wanted to do the same thing, and I realized, wow, that's actually complicated. And looking at the code, the code that's available to you, the API is a bit challenging. So instead, I look into the README, and I find that there's a third-party package that exists that makes the wrapping of the DOM much easier. And I get super excited, find this package, install it, run it. There's a web server in it, and you can load your code directly, and I show you how you can run functions. The problem is that was my first experience. So I load this nice library, I run the server, and I get this error. Now, if you've been doing Go for a long time, you might recognize these terrible errors. Do anyone know what that means, this panic? You don't know? So this is, I believe, because I didn't go deep enough, but I believe this is a JSON decoding issue. And the code is decoding some JSON and is failing to do that. And I get no stack trace, no information. And I start looking at how can I debug my code, and there's no way. So WebAssembly doesn't seem to be supporting debugging. There's no dwarf support. There's nothing like that. So I get a bit frustrated at that point. I was really excited to do this thing. So I go to the repo on GitHub, and I see that the code has not been touched in months. And I start reading some of the comments and the issues, and I realize it's this one guy who's spending a lot of his free time building this passion project. And it's a lot of work. It's quite amazing, but it's a lot of work for one person. And I'm not sure at that point that I really want to invest too much in trying to fix that. So I started working and reading through the code, and I realized that here what's going on is there's some data that gets saved into local storage, and the local storage data comes out, and it's not working. And I just don't have enough tools and knowledge to be able to help. So I just open an issue on GitHub, and I decide to move on and use the built-in API that Go provides. And now when I open the package, this is what I read. This package is experimental. Its current scope is only to allow tests to run, but not yet to provide a comprehensive API for users. It also doesn't follow the Go-compatible promise. So the challenge at that point is, do I really want to invest too much time in that? And I start looking at the API, and I look at Go 1.12, and I realize that they changed the API in 1.12, meaning that all the dependencies that were built on top of that are probably broken from third parties. So I'm a bit sad, and I get to my last question, and I think about it, and I feel a bit like a failure, to be honest. I was hoping I would build like a video game on the browser in Go, and where's the game at? What did you do? You just spent like hours just digging and trying to find these things? How am I even the CTO of a successful startup? Like, I have these feelings of like, am I a failure? And then I remember that the way I look at things is that success for me looked like learning something new. The entire point of looking into WebAssembly was just to learn something new. It was not to build a video game. It was to learn something new. And I learned so much. I learned about the limitations. I learned about the opportunities. I learned about the challenges that the community is going through. And this knowledge is something that was my journey. This is something that is useful. And I decided to share that with the rest of my teammates. And maybe someone will find a better interest, and they will go and take this knowledge and take it to the next level. I'm sharing that with you. So it's not a waste of time. And I think when you take this approach, you would find that the journey is more important when you learn than the destination. Second point I want to make is learning to learn. I think this is something that took me a while, and this is only about my own experience. But understanding what helps you to learn is probably the most important thing and what allowed me to be learning for the last 20 years. And I realized that for me, learning has to be about people I care. So this was my daughter when she was 2 years old. And I love to build things for people, especially for people that I know have a need and I can build for them. That drives my knowledge and my desire for education. So the challenge with the situation was that my daughter could use my iPad, and I wanted her to be able to watch content. But the problem is, the iTunes apps was not the best app to use. It was really complicated, and she was young, so she would touch the screen and try to play the videos. She could not read. So I decided I would just build an app for her, and I started learning how to write iOS apps. And that was great, but then I got into another problem. I needed content. And the challenge is that my kids are the 5th generation born in a different country than their parents. So every generation, we have this habit of moving on to another country. And my wife comes from a different country than me, and we decided that we didn't want to do what our parents did, which was to not speak the native language. So we decided that for our kids, we would actually ban English at home. That might surprise you based on the political situation we have right now, but the goal was no English. We still have this rule now, no English. So they had to get content in the native languages we wanted them to learn. And that was a bit of a challenge because you cannot find this content on TV. So we had to find it online. And I started looking at streaming. And streaming, especially for iPad or for iOS, as this thing called HLS, for HTTP live streaming. So it's a format, this is what allows you to stream content directly onto your device. And my idea was like, I'm going to write a Go code that would pretend to be an iPad, get the stream, and then stream to disk so I can collect all this information over time. So first thing I did is set up a proxy so I could sniff all the traffic that was going through the iPad app, see all the API calls being made, and understand how the app was getting its content online. And what I did is I took TV apps. So in a lot of countries, you can watch public content for a few days after it has been broadcast. So this is my plan. I start getting the iPad app. I start sniffing the traffic. I find the APIs. And then I realize I have a problem. You might be familiar with this issue, geofencing. This is not available in your country. Now, I'm sure you all know the solution for that, but get a VPN. So I get a VPN, pick the different countries I needed, get the data. Finally, I get to this playlist. And so this is the format. This is the M3U file. And this is basically a list of playlists. So if we go back to this list, you can see you get this main playlist here, and the playlist will contain different other playlists at different resolutions. And the idea is when you stream video, you don't have to buffer everything at once. Depending on the speed of your connection, we're going to give you a low-quality, low-res video file, and then as you buffer, we're going to give you better and better resolution files. So I get this file. And now I need to write a decoder for that, so I'm getting to learn all this new format I didn't really know too much about. I get to pick the highest format, which in this case the HG file, and I pick that file, and then when you follow that file, then you get all the different chunks in that. And the way it works is to be able to scrub to the end or to the middle of a video, everything is broken down into, in this case, 10 seconds video snippets. And this is why sometimes when you lose bandwidth, you might see that the quality will get bad and then it gets better. That's because the client switched you from a higher resolution segment to a worse one, and then you might be coming back up. So I get excited because now, instead of one big file, I get all those different chunks. So I start writing code, and Go is great at that. I'm going to write some concurrent fetching of all those files. And the idea is I might have 150 files. I'm going to take all those different chunks, download them all at once or with workers, and I'm going to reassemble the files, so it's going to be much, much faster. Also, I get into this big challenge of can I make that faster than FFmpeg? FFmpeg is a C library that is being used for a lot of this content, and FFmpeg actually lets you do that. You can point it to an M3U8 file, and it would download the file. But I wanted to do it in Go. I wanted to learn. So I started doing that, and it turns out I was more than 10 times faster than FFmpeg because I was able to run the code in parallel, which was also very interesting, is that the challenge when you learn how to write code in parallel is that you might not realize you're missing some of the chunks. You might be exiting before all the workers are done. Now, if you do that with a video file and my daughter doesn't get the last 20 seconds of a cartoon, she would yell at me. So I had a really good QA team on that. We're all happy. It's working out. I get those videos, put them back together, get them onto the app. And the next week, what happens? Well, the format doesn't work anymore, and it just got switched to being encrypted. So I don't know what happened. I don't know if they saw me sniffing the content or a bunch of people were doing that, but all of a sudden they switched to this AES 128 encryption. And I don't know too much about crypto, but I know that AES 128 has not been cracked, or I would need a lot of Google servers to be able to crack that. So I get a bit disappointed, but then I realized if the application can decode it, I should be able to do exactly the same as the application. And turns out, they give you the key for the decoding in the playlist. So the key is actually there. This is the URL to get the key. And the only thing you need to do is to just keep a cookie jar. So the call you made on the website to get the information, you keep this information, and then you go and ask for the key, and now you get this AES key that you need, and we should be able to decode all the different chunks. And I'm like, exciting, I'm going to do that. Let's see how we do AES decoding. So I jump in, go as great support for crypto, and this is the entire code, by the way. It's not that big. But what I do is that I create a cipher. I get you can use an IV, so I'm not going to get into the details. Let's just say you have the key, and I can take all the different blocks, and I start decoding and saving to file. And it all works, and my daughter gets all the cartoons, and she gets super excited. And at that point, I have a discussion with my wife, and she thinks I got more excited than the kids. Because I got to learn so many cool things, and I got so excited about maintaining my software that probably I did that for me than for her. But now, 10 years later, we have so much content that everyone is very happy. So this is how I personally learn. I do something for someone I care about, and I will go through this journey, and I will try to learn as I do that. And it's really motivating because you can provide something for someone, and you get to learn at the same time. The third and last point is about maximizing my impact when I learn. Now, this is a discussion I had with a friend of mine a few months back, and he said he's spending a lot of time learning, but he doesn't feel he's making progress. He's a bit frustrated and discouraged that he's spending time every evening, but he doesn't really feel that it's useful. So, we were walking and started building a list of tactics that I use that I didn't really realize I was using to make my learning more efficient. So let's go through the list. The first thing I do is allocating time. I think it's really important, and it doesn't matter how much. It might be just 15 minutes, but I need to put that in my calendar. I'm a very busy person, and I try to have a lot of free time, but most of the free time ends up being with my family. So I'm trying to find time that would block in my calendar about learning. And in my case, it's when everybody's asleep, I have no pressure, and I will take 45 minutes, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. I put that in my calendar, and I really block this time for learning. The good thing with that is that I don't feel guilty the rest of the time if I don't get to learn, but that time is dedicated for education for me. Second thing I do, and that might be surprising, but I have a real backlog. And I just use a to-do app, and they're just sorted, but I have a realistic backlog of what I want to learn. I will find something exciting, and I will just add it to the backlog, and on a weekly basis, I'm just going to shift things based on what I want to learn. And by the way, that doesn't have to be just technical. I have a bunch of things like gardening. I don't know much about gardening, and I got excited about, doesn't matter, but started growing seeds, and I got a fish also for my kids. I didn't know how to take care of a fish. So I put that in the backlog. I'm like, okay, I'm going to learn how to do those things. And because I have time that's allocated, I get to go through my backlog. And sometimes I'm like, I'm not excited about that, and I just remove it from the backlog. The third thing that's probably one of the key elements for me personally is to time box my learning. I have a tendency, because I'm very passionate, to go into those things, and it's 4 o'clock in the morning, and I realize I'm still doing this thing. And it's probably not a good thing, because two hours later, I'm going to have to take my kids to school. So by taking a time box and saying it's going to be between this time and this time, I'm going to be spending 45 minutes learning Dart and Flutter. At the end of this 45 minutes, my alarm goes off, and I can see what I learned and if I'm happy about it or not. So in the case of WebAssembly, I gave myself about an hour. At the end of the hour, I answered most of my questions, and I decided at that point I'm not going to go further. But if I had found something more exciting, or maybe a small snippet of something else inside that, I would have put it into my backlog and put another 45 minutes or an hour for that. Time boxing for me is key. Otherwise, I would spend hours and hours learning things and not getting this feeling that I'm making progress. Fourth thing is stretching your knowledge. I think that's a really hard thing to do, but I always want to learn things I don't think I will be able to learn, or really at the edge of my knowledge. So it's easy to learn things that we know we're going to be able to acquire very quickly. It's easy to say, oh, I'm going to learn a Go library that exists. But it's much harder to do something that might not be useful, but that will really stretch you. So for instance, we're talking with Bill about that. Last year, I started learning COBOL. Why? I don't know. I was interested in learning COBOL. I think there's a lot of interesting things in it. So I allocated an hour to be able to write some COBOL code and generate it. And that really stretched my knowledge. And I got to really bring a lot of this knowledge back home to other projects. In other cases, might be learning a new language. I learned Dart over the break because I wanted to learn how to write a Flutter app. And I'm like, I don't know Flutter, I don't know Dart, I'm going to start learning it. And this is really not what I would do. I'm more of a back-end person. I'm not a mobile person. I don't do UI. But I got to learn that. And because I time box it and because I have this schedule time, I don't feel bad if I don't go anywhere. I don't feel bad if I don't like it. I'll just stop after the end of the block. But I will force myself to learn things I would not think I like. Fifth is seeking collaboration. Without collaborations, I could not have done what I did. If it was not for those old school sound engineers, if it was not for those crackers online, if it was not for the Ruby community, and if it was not for the people on GitHub, I would not be where I am right now. So seeking collaboration is an easy way of getting started if you don't have a backlog. Finding a project and contributing to it, asking questions, getting this information, to me is really a source of information. A lot of what I learn it from others. And this is me seeking the collaboration and also seeing how you can provide information to others, not just for you. Now, one interesting aspect of seeking collaboration is that you can also, it's not about you getting the information, it's also about you providing the information. So a lot of things I did at the beginning, for instance, was writing blog posts or trying to understand a concept. The 45 minutes I spent, I would spend 45 minutes learning something, and then I would spend 45 minutes trying to explain it. And I think that creates a collaboration where you provide information and then other people will then provide information in an async manner to you. Sixth, read and research. So this is something that really took me time to actually do because I'm so driven. I need to spend time not doing. It's easy to jump onto the keyboard and start coding or learning and doing things like that. A lot of what I end up doing now is sometimes just going for a walk, thinking about a problem without even knowing the solutions yet. I take a book, and I take a book about a topic I might not care too much about, but that sounds interesting. So what I mean by that is that I might not have an application for it right away, but I want to research it, I want to learn it. And taking this step where you don't get to actually do it, but you get to observe, and you have all those questions, I have a notebook and I write all the questions. But this time where I don't do, I'm learning so much. And then when I start doing again, all those questions come back and I save so much time going through my process. The last item, and probably the most important one, is to have fun. So if you learn and you don't have fun, just stop right away. Switch to something else. Learn something else. Having fun needs to be part of the learning process. And if you have kids or nephews, or if you played with kids, you know that when kids have fun, time doesn't matter. And I think for learning for us should be the same thing. It's not about trying to get this knowledge so you can make more money or you can get a better job or people will look up to you. It's really about this feeling of, wow, I'm going to bed tonight and I learned so much. I'm excited about that. And maybe I have an idea about how I can use it. And maybe I can also use it to help someone I care about. So this is my list. This is what I hope you'll be able to take and maybe adapt to be your own list and be able to do things. I hope you enjoyed walking with me through my journey. We're coming to an end, and I want to just recap a little bit and reflect on the pillars, the three things I mentioned that to me are part of my journey, and I hope they will be part of my journey until the end of my life. Always be learning, Never stop. It's so much fun. Like, why would you stop learning? It's not because you become the boss of a company that, you have to be in meetings and stop learning. Actually, this is when you need to learn even more. Learn to learn. You need to understand what drives you to learn, how you'd like to do it, and what is this driver. Third one, maximize your learning process. It's so important that you can make progress so you don't burn out. There's nothing worse than people that feel they're forced to go to their desk to learn and they feel burning out. And there's also nothing worse to me to see engineers who have 10 or 15 years of experience and they stop learning because they learn enough. So maximizing this learning process will help you to keep on moving through this knowledge over time. I believe that if you continue to learn and you continue to stay on this learning path, you would always feel fulfilled. And you cannot fail because you'll be progressing and learning on a daily basis. You'll be successful every single day, and to me, that's what matters. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. That was fantastic, especially the last point, 7 points that you had. The 7th one, we do it very regularly. Have fun.
Have fun.
All right, questions for Matt? Now it's about time, universe, and everything.
Wow.
So, any questions? I have one, so I'm waiting. I'm giving everyone the chance. All right, they said go for it.
I guess it was very, very clear, or it was very, very boring. One of the two.
So, quick question for you.
Yeah.
I love the idea that you're trying to build apps for your daughter. Mm-hmm. How much, so you mentioned allocation of time, but how much time do you actually get to from the daily grind of running a business?
So when I started, my wife was pregnant. That's when I started building the app. So I had a lot of free time. And then I had a first kid, and get some free time. And I have 2 kids now and a company. I usually try to block 3 to 4 hours a week. And I know it's a lot of time. It's about 2 hours during work time that I use to learn things that are in the backlog that could be useful for my company, and 2 hours that are personal. And I try to spend at least 1 day during my vacation time to just go deep into something.
That's indeed fantastic. And I think a lot of us should probably learn this, that we get so stuck with our daily work that we forget to learn.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you very much.